3 true disturbing trucker horror stories. Out here, the road stretches endlessly, an unbroken ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the night. The hum of the tires, the low rumble of an engine pushing forward into the unknown. It's a rhythm truckers know well. Mile after mile, town after town, the solitude becomes familiar, almost comforting. But comfort is a fragile thing on the open road. Beyond the glow of your headlights, the darkness seems to press in, thick and impenetrable. It creeps along the edges of your vision, shifting, waiting. Most drivers don't think twice about what lingers in the black void beyond the pavement. They dismiss the strange shapes that flicker in their mirrors as exhaustion playing tricks on tired eyes. But some have seen things they cannot explain. And a few, the unlucky ones, have found themselves in the presence of something they were never meant to encounter. These are their stories. Encounters whispered between truck stops. Tales of figures that appear where no one should be. Voices carried on the wind, calling from radios long out of service. Engines that stall without reason. Time that bends and twists in ways that defy logic. Some walked away shaken but alive. Others? Their rigs were found abandoned, engines still running, but the drivers were gone. If you think the road is empty at night, if you believe you are truly alone as you navigate the endless miles, you might want to think again. There's something about the open road at night. Something that makes even the most seasoned drivers shift in their seats, glance once more at their mirrors, and check their locks before settling in for the long haul. Out there, beyond the glow of the dashboard, the world is different. It feels stretched, as if the road exists in its own time, its own space, separate from the towns and cities it connects. Truckers will tell you there's a rhythm to it. The hum of tires against the pavement, the steady pull of the engine as it eats up the miles, the occasional static crackle of the radio breaking through the silence. It's a job that demands endurance, concentration, a certain level of trust in the road ahead. But trust can be a dangerous thing, because the road, no matter how familiar, doesn't always follow the rules of the world we know. Somewhere out there, past the last streetlight, beyond the reach of cell service, there are places where reality frays. Places where shadows stretch just a little too long, where the headlights catch something on the shoulder, but by the time you turn your head, it's already gone. Ask 100 truckers if they've ever seen something strange out there, and most will laugh it off. But if you catch them at the right moment, when the coffee's gone cold, when fatigue has stripped away the bravado, you'll hear the real stories. Stories of figures standing motionless on empty highways. Hitchhikers who vanish without a trace. Convoys of long-dead truckers still calling out over CB radios that shouldn't even work. There are stretches of road where time bends in ways that shouldn't be possible, where headlights fail without reason, where the temperature drops in the cab even though the heater is on full blast. Some drivers keep Lucky Charms in their glove compartments. Some won't take certain routes after dark. And some never had the chance to tell their stories at all. It's easy to dismiss these tales as tricks of the mind, fatigue, exhaustion, the brain weaving nightmares from the long, lonely hours. But that doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the rigs found abandoned with engines still running, doors flung open as if the driver had left in a hurry. It doesn't explain the voices that call out from radios that have long been unplugged. It doesn't explain why, in certain places, the road feels like it's watching. If you've ever driven through the night, if you've ever felt the weight of the darkness pressing in just a little too close, then you already know. The road is never truly empty, and some travelers were never meant to make it home. Welcome back to Victor Nightshade, where we uncover the most chilling true horror stories. If you enjoy unsettling encounters and unexplained mysteries, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now settle in, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself, because these stories may change the way you see the open road forever. Story 1: The Ghost Hitchhiker. Jude had been on the road for 14 hours straight. The stretch of highway ahead was nothing but an endless, twisting ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the night. He had driven through exhaustion before. He knew the tricks fatigue could play. The fleeting shadows at the edge of his vision, the way the mind stitched together images from the darkness, turning the ordinary into something strange. But this was different. The road was nearly deserted, the only sound the steady drone of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the wipers as they cleared away a misting rain. The highway was suffocated by fog, thick enough that his high beams did little more than illuminate the endless gray. It was the kind of night where the world outside the cab barely seemed real. And then he saw her. A woman, standing on the shoulder of the road, just beyond the glow of his headlights. Her clothes clung to her like she had been caught in a storm, her long, dark hair hanging in heavy strands over her face. She was still, too still, except for one trembling hand, raised slightly, hesitantly, asking for a ride. Jude's grip on the wheel tightened. He wasn't the type to pick up strangers, especially not this late, not on an empty road like this. But there was something about her. Something in the way she stood there, as if she had been waiting for him, as if she had always been there. His foot hovered over the gas pedal, a quiet voice in the back of his mind telling him to keep driving, to pretend he hadn't seen her. But another thought, an uneasy one, crept in. What if she was in trouble? What if she needed help? With a heavy sigh, he eased the truck onto the shoulder and reached across the cab, unlocking the door. The woman moved slowly, her bare feet soundless against the wet pavement as she climbed into the passenger seat. She didn't look at him, didn't speak, just stared straight ahead, her pale hands folded neatly in her lap. Jude swallowed, clearing his throat as he shifted back into gear. "Where are you headed?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The woman didn't answer. For a long moment, the only sound in the cab was the low rumble of the engine. And then, in a voice so soft it was almost lost beneath the rain, she murmured, "Home." Jude nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "All right, just tell me where to turn." Still, she said nothing. The miles stretched on. The rain fell harder, turning the highway into a slick, glistening path. Jude tried not to glance at her, tried to focus on the road ahead, but something about her silence made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was no shivering, no shifting in her seat. It was like she wasn't really there at all. And then something made him glance in her direction. The seat beside him was empty. His breath caught in his throat. His hands clenched around the wheel. He hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt the weight shift in the cab. He turned his head quickly, scanning the road behind him, expecting to see her standing there again. But there was nothing. Jude slammed on the brakes, his heart hammering against his ribs. The truck skidded slightly on the wet pavement before coming to a stop. He threw it into park, hands shaking as he reached for the passenger door, flinging it open. The seatbelt was still buckled. The cushion where she had sat was damp, soaked through as if she had just climbed in from the rain. Jude sat there, unmoving, his mind racing to find a reasonable explanation. Had he imagined the whole thing? Was this exhaustion catching up to him? But then he saw it. Just outside the truck, on the wet pavement footprints. Small, bare, leading away from the vehicle, before suddenly stopping. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, staring at those footprints, at the impossible way they ended as if she had simply vanished into thin air. But eventually, he forced himself to move, to drive, to leave that stretch of road behind. It wasn't until later, sitting in a roadside diner with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, that he heard the story. An old trucker, with lines carved deep into his weathered face, had been watching him for a while before finally speaking up. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son." Jude hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Maybe I have." The old man sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "That road," he muttered, shaking his head. "Been driving it for years. Always the same spot. A girl, waitin' for a ride. You ain't the first to pick her up. Won't be the last, either." Jude felt his blood turn to ice. "Who is she?" The old man exhaled, as if the weight of the story had settled on him once again. "Used to be a hitchhiker way back. Poor girl was headin' home one night. Never made it. Some trucker, maybe like you, maybe not, picked her up. They say he fell asleep at the wheel. They crashed. She never left that road after that." Jude swallowed, his throat dry. He wanted to argue, to tell himself it was a trick of the mind, that he had been hallucinating from exhaustion. But he couldn't shake the memory of her face. The damp seat, the footprints that had led to nowhere. And the worst part, the part that made his stomach twist with unease. As he sat there, staring into his coffee, he realized something. When he had first stopped for her, he hadn't told her his name, hadn't told her anything about himself at all. But she had spoken just once, and she had said something very specific. Home. Not, "Can you take me home?" Not, "I need a ride home." Just, home. As if she had known exactly where he was going. As if she had been waiting for him. Story 2: The Phantom Convoy. Mitch had been hauling cargo through the Arizona desert for hours, the road ahead stretching endlessly beneath the weight of his 18-wheeler. The night air outside was dry, the kind of desert silence that felt too still, too empty. He had driven this route 100 times before, long stretches of nothingness, an occasional gas station, and miles of open road where the sky swallowed the land. But tonight felt different. The glow from his dashboard flickered faintly as he reached for his coffee, but the stale liquid had long gone cold. His CB radio crackled every now and then, picking up the occasional burst of static, but nothing unusual. He didn't expect anyone to be out here at this hour, not this deep into the desert. But then, the radio came to life. At first, the words were barely audible, just fragmented bits of conversation lost in the hum of the road. But then a voice, low, rough, and unmistakably human, broke through. "You boys still out there?" Mitch frowned. He reached for the mic, his fingers tightening around it. He hadn't heard another truck in miles, hadn't seen so much as a taillight in the distance. But the voice was clear. Too clear. Another voice followed, distant but distinct, as if coming from just over the next hill. "Keep going, we're almost there." Mitch sat up straighter, his eyes flicking to his mirrors. Nothing. Just the desert stretching into darkness, an endless, barren wasteland. His hand hovered over the CB mic, debating whether or not to respond. Maybe it was a group of truckers on another frequency. Maybe a signal bouncing off an old tower. Harmless. Just radio interference. But as he hesitated, the voices continued. Low murmurs, men talking among themselves, giving directions, warning each other about the road ahead. "Bridge should be coming up soon. Hold formation. Keep it tight. Weather's getting bad up ahead. Stay close." Mitch frowned. Weather? There hadn't been so much as a cloud in the sky for hours. And a bridge? He knew this stretch of road. There wasn't a bridge for at least another 50 miles. His fingers twitched against the wheel as an uneasy feeling settled deep in his chest. He pressed the button on the CB mic. "This is Big Iron out on Route 87. Who am I hearing out there?" Silence. Static fizzled, hissing softly through the speaker. The voices stopped. For a few minutes, Mitch thought maybe he had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just highway fatigue, his mind playing tricks on him in the long hours of the night. But then, just as he was about to let it go, the radio crackled back to life. "Truck down! Truck down! Everyone hold!" The voice cut off sharply, followed by another, more urgent, more panicked. "Jesus, he's gone off the road. Hold position. Someone get a light on him." Mitch's hands clenched around the wheel. He felt his pulse in his throat, the steady thrum of unease building with every word. This wasn't just radio chatter. This was something else. Something wrong. The wind outside picked up, howling through the desert like a distant warning. The air inside the cab felt colder, pressing in tight against his skin. And then, just ahead, illuminated by his headlights, he saw it. A wreck. A twisted pile of metal and shattered glass, barely visible in the dim glow of the moon. It looked ancient, rusted trucks, their cabs crumpled like tin cans, long forgotten and left to rot on the roadside. The skeletal remains of trailers lay scattered, their cargo long gone. But something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just an accident site. It was too orderly, too deliberate. Like the trucks had never been moved, like they had been sitting there for decades. Mitch slowed the rig, heart hammering in his chest. He'd never seen a wreck like this before, not on this road. He reached for his radio again, hesitating before pressing the button. "Anyone out there? What happened here?" For a long moment, nothing. Just the low hum of the engine, the quiet hiss of static. And then, a voice. But not over the radio this time. It came from outside. A faint, distant sound like the murmur of men talking, the rustling of movement just beyond the wreckage. Mitch's breath hitched. He peered into the darkness, straining to see past the twisted metal, but there was nothing there. Just the wreck. Just the wind. Just the overwhelming, suffocating feeling that he wasn't alone. He didn't stay to find out more. His foot hit the gas, the truck lurching forward as he pulled back onto the highway, leaving the wreckage behind in a cloud of dust. But as he drove, his radio came to life one last time. A single voice. Soft, distant. Almost relieved. "Keep going, we're almost there." Mitch never took that route at night again. Weeks later, unable to shake the unease, he stopped at a roadside diner, asking one of the older truckers if he knew anything about the wreck. The man stared at him for a long time before setting his coffee down with a heavy sigh. "Convoy went down out there. Long time ago. Bad storm rolled in real sudden. One truck lost control, took the whole line with it. They say the drivers kept calling for each other, kept trying to warn the others, right up until the moment they hit." Mitch swallowed hard. "That wreck, it's still there." The old trucker nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. Mitch hesitated. Then, voice quieter now, he asked the only question that really mattered. And the radio? The old man didn't answer right away. Just picked up his cup, staring into it like the answer was somewhere at the bottom. Finally, he said, "Thing is, those voices never stopped. They're still out there, still trying to make it through the storm. Still trying to reach a destination they'll never find." Mitch never used his CB radio at night again. Story 3: The Highway Stalker. Danny had been driving for almost 10 hours straight. His cargo was light, his route familiar, just another long stretch of highway through the dark, empty plains outside of Denver. The kind of road where the sky felt too big, the silence too heavy. The kind of road where anything could be out there, watching, waiting. It started just past midnight. The black sedan appeared in his mirror, silent, steady. At first, Danny didn't think much of it. Plenty of cars shared the highway, even this late. But as the miles passed, something gnawed at the back of his mind. No matter how long he drove, no matter how many exits came and went, the sedan was always there. Its headlights stayed just far enough behind to avoid suspicion, but never out of sight. When he slowed, it slowed. When he sped up, it did too, matching his pace with an unsettling precision. He changed lanes. It followed. He switched again. So did the car. Not once did it try to pass. For over an hour, Danny watched it in his mirrors. He rubbed his eyes, convincing himself it was just coincidence. Maybe the driver was heading the same way. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down he knew better. The turnoff for a rest stop appeared ahead. Danny's fingers tightened on the wheel. He needed a break, just a quick stop, stretch his legs, shake off the unease creeping through his chest. As he signaled and pulled onto the ramp, his pulse pounded in anticipation, waiting for the sedan to follow. But when he checked his mirror, the car was gone. There were no exits, no roads leading off into the darkness, just the highway stretching endlessly behind him. He hadn't seen it turn, hadn't seen it slow. It was as if it had never been there at all. A heavy breath left his lungs. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing. He rolled his shoulders, pushing the tension away as he parked near the diner, its neon lights flickering against the cracked pavement. The place was nearly empty, just a bored cashier behind the counter and an old man nursing a cup of coffee in the farthest booth. Danny ordered a coffee, rubbed his temples, and turned toward the door. But just as he took a step, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Someone was watching him. At the very back of the diner, in the darkest booth, sat a man in a black suit. He was impossibly still, hands folded neatly on the table. His skin was pale, almost too pale, as if he hadn't seen the sun in years. His eyes never blinked, never wavered. And his mouth was stretched into the widest grin Danny had ever seen. Too wide, too wrong. Danny felt his pulse hammer in his ears. His throat was dry, his breath shallow. Every instinct screamed at him to look away, to leave. But he couldn't move. The man's gaze held him in place, that eerie, frozen smile burning into his mind. Then, the man raised his hand. Just a little. Just enough to curl his fingers in a slow, deliberate wave. Danny turned and walked out. Fast. He didn't run, but his legs burned with the urge to. The second he stepped outside, the night air hit him like a slap, cold and thin. He hurried to his truck, climbing in and locking the doors in one motion. His hands were shaking as he turned the key, the engine roaring to life. He checked his mirrors, heart still pounding. The parking lot was empty. The man was gone. A long, shaky breath left his chest. Maybe he was just overtired. Maybe the coffee would have helped. But Danny wasn't sticking around to find out. He pulled back onto the highway, desperate to put as much distance between himself and that diner as possible. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to look in the mirrors. But a few miles down the road, his stomach dropped. The black sedan was back. It followed him, headlights steady, unwavering. Just as before, it never tried to pass, never fell too far behind. It just watched. Danny's hands were clammy against the wheel. He picked up speed. So did the sedan. He switched lanes, changed highways, took exits only to merge back on. It never left his mirror. Hours passed. The sun began to rise, casting a dim glow over the landscape. And then, without warning, the sedan turned off onto an empty dirt road. Danny slammed the brakes, watching as it disappeared into the dust, swallowed by the barren fields. For a long time, he sat there, hands gripping the wheel, heart pounding. He didn't know where that road led. He didn't want to know. Days later, he couldn't shake the feeling of that frozen grin, those headlights trailing him through the dark. He started asking around, other truckers, gas station clerks, night shift workers. No one had heard of a black sedan tailing drivers, but they had heard of something else. A man in a black suit, always at the edge of truck stops, sitting in diners, standing just outside the glow of streetlights. Never talking, never blinking, just watching. And every trucker who had seen him, they were never seen again. Some were reported missing weeks later, their rigs abandoned by the roadside. Others simply vanished, their last known location logged into dispatch systems, never reaching their final destination. No calls, no signs of struggle, just gone. Danny doesn't take night drives anymore. And when he stops at a diner, he never, ever looks at the last booth in the corner. Out on the open road, beneath the vast, empty sky, things lurk in the dark. Shadows that don't belong. Voices that call from nowhere. Figures that vanish before your eyes. But the question remains, were these just stories? Or warnings? Which of these tales sent chills down your spine? The ghostly hitchhiker, the phantom voices of the lost convoy, or the black sedan that never stops watching? Have you ever experienced something unexplainable on the road? If you have, you're not alone. Tell your story in the comments below. And if you're still craving more horror, check out my playlist of true, terrifying trucker encounters. Some roads should never be traveled alone, and some stories are best left untold. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story might be one you won't forget. Or worse, one that finds you.